Grab a seat in the Nosebleeds section and listen up. Episode 13 of From the Nosebleeds MMA podcast is in your ear. Whether it's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or SoundCloud, I'm Blake Arulian alongside my good pal, Brick Harris, to provide a weekly update for all things MMA. Whether it's cage side or from the cheap seats, we got you. Special thanks to Robert Jeremias, Don't Be a Richard Music, and all of the pages on Instagram that support and follow us. Brick, you ready to throw down today?
I think so. I've got my WSOF beanie on.
I love it.
I was hoping that there would be something about the WSOF or PFL that I could talk about today, but it seems a little shallow in that department.
Keep on keeping on in the UFC. That's exactly what we're doing. So.
Yes, sir. All right, top 5. We are going to be talking about sports transfers. We'll get a little bit more into that, explain kind of what we mean, and then for the 5 rounds of meat and potatoes that we like to just dig into, round 1. We're going to be recapping the UFC Fight Night event that happened this last weekend between Zabit Magomedsharipov and Calvin Kattar. Round 2 will be, kind of an obvious question. What's next for Zabit Magomedsharipov? After a win over Calvin Kattar, we're going to discuss what we think is next for the Russian come-up. Round 3. We're going to be talking about MMA gossip. This is something I've wanted to talk about for so long. Because there's always MMA gossip.
It's very relevant right now.
Exactly.
Very relevant.
Always UFC trash talk, rumors, fight news, whatever it is. So we're going to be hitting and dipping a little bit into that. Round 4, we're going to talk Blachowicz versus Jacare Souza, which takes place this weekend on ESPN+. And then round 5, we are going to talk, if we are here for it, George Masvidal versus Nick Diaz. That's right, not Nate. Nick Diaz. Yikers. So before we get into the 5 rounds, Blake, I'm gonna turn the time over to you to give me your top 5 list.
All right. So with this past weekend, there's been a lot of talk about certain fighters going, and we're going to talk about this more in round 3 with MMA gossip, but there's a lot of fighters that are saying, I want to go to boxing. Boxers saying they want to go to MMA. And the question is, how successful is that, and what kind of fighters have been able to do that crossover successfully? So we were a little more vague on this one. People who have transferred sports and things like that, specifically MMA fighters and things like that, because Bo Jackson would obviously be number 1 for both of us. But in terms of combat sports. And the way that I decided to do this was the magnitude of these guys. And this isn't necessarily in order, but this is more of just the top 5 guys in my head. Number 5, I'm going to go with Conor McGregor. Conor McGregor, though he did not have the most successful, outing against Floyd Mayweather, of course he lost, he put up a great fight. And not only that, but I mean, it was completely expected for Conor to be okay in the boxing ring because of how significant and incredible of a striker that he was in the UFC in his history, and all of the Kodak moments in terms of his knockouts early on in his career. And so Conor McGregor was absolutely successful, in my opinion, in being able to bring over his style of trash talk, MMA, UFC, and bring that over into the boxing world, get his payday against one of the greatest of all time in Floyd Mayweather. And so at the end of the day, I think myself, and I think almost everybody would consider everything but that loss a win for Conor McGregor. And so that's why I put him on this list. Number 4, I'm going to go with Greg Hardy. And I think Greg Hardy is interesting because it's not a boxer going to, or a wrestler going into something. This is strictly a football player who went into MMA and is actually pretty darn good at it, and he's getting better and better and better. I mean, despite the loss this past weekend, I think Greg Hardy has a strong future in MMA, and I think that his activity of having 5 fights this year goes to show his dedication to this, and that, to me, really impresses me. Number 3, I'm going to go with Henry Cejudo, and the reason why is I really like the idea that his wrestling background turned him into MMA. And now, as much of an incredible wrestler he is, he also has incredible striking. And so Henry Cejudo has been able to make that transfer very well. And now, he's one of the biggest stars in the game, but double champ and things like that. And, the triple C shtick that he does. Number 2, one of the most legendary people of all time in the sport of MMA and in the world of wrestling, Brock Lesnar. Brock Lesnar obviously had an incredible incredible, career in terms of wrestling and collegiate wrestling and things like that. Moved on into MMA and was the champion there, and then has moved back into the WWE, where he is kind of put back on the show and things like that. But Brock Lesnar has always been one of those pioneers of MMA, really set the tone for the Conor McGregors and the other guys that have made big highlights off of, having a big mouth. And I think number one, and this is a little premature, but I believe number one would be Colby Covington. And Here is why. Colby Covington is absolutely, one of the best wrestlers in the UFC, definitely one of the best wrestlers in the welterweight division as he goes up and is preparing to fight against Kamaru Usman. 40-7 at Oregon State in his Division I wrestling career. He not only is an incredible wrestler, but he's also an incredible showman. As much as everybody likes to hate on Colby, he's got everyone in the palm of his hand. And that, to me, is a skill that Colby is able to do. Because we have seen, I know I have, and I'm sure you have too, Brick, we have seen Colby Covington when the cameras aren't there, when the girls aren't there, when the belt's not there, when the MAGA hat is not on. And he is actually a very, very kind, good person. He's playing the heel. He wants to be the bad guy. And so to me, I find Colby Covington's ability to play the WWE bad guy in the UFC in 2019 incredibly impressive, and that's why I have him at number one.
I love it. Love that list. Mine's actually pretty similar, although I don't have Colby Chaos Covington therein. I find him just as a pure fighter. He's just, he's a dog. I'm so excited. December 14th.
It's going to be great.
I seriously, I get goosebumps just like literally thinking about December 14th. We might be there actually in Vegas.
Yes.
So if you see us on TV, don't be shocked. Just kidding. That'd be crazy. All right. I'm going to go into my top five. Mine includes a few guys that you mentioned, but maybe just in a little bit. That's true. I guess I don't have an order either. But Lesnar, Izzy, Fury, Stipe, Mighty Mouse.
I love it.
Going to break that down a little bit. So Brock Lesnar, first of all, obviously he was the WWE guy. He was the Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson who made his way into, no offense, a real fighting sport. Right, because WWE is as impressively physical and of specimens that those wrestlers are in the WWE, making the jump to MMA where people literally get hurt, and it's real. That's a scary leap, and the man did it, and he contended and became a star in the UFC as well. So something pretty tough to do. Israel Adesanya, he should be higher. For me, I mean, he kind of stands in a category of his own because although he's not a cross athlete coming from WWE or the NFL or anything like that, he was a pure kickboxer and he was a fantastic kickboxer. Coming from kickboxing or coming from other forms of martial arts does not always translate into the UFC. Take Ben Askren, for example. No offense, but undefeated wrestler, dominant wrestler coming in, and why couldn't he do what Henry Cejudo did, right? Both incredible wrestlers. Some talents don't translate as well as others do. So Israel Adesanya is now the middleweight champ, undisputed and undefeated, and he was not always a MMA guy. He's thrown grappling into the mix. He's thrown all these different skills into the mix, and he has come in and he has banged. Now, Tyson Fury. Not necessarily in the UFC yet, but man, this is going to happen. This is going to happen. I'm calling it. You heard it here first. Brick Harris calls it. Tyson Fury will make a UFC appearance. Did you happen to see Tyson Fury working out with Darren Till?
He looked good. He looked like he was not completely, get the wheels, oil the wheels a little bit, get it going. But he looks solid. I know that grappling definitely takes a lot more time and things like that, and that would be the thing that I would worry about for him. At least getting a very solid takedown defense if I were him. But other than that, he looked very good.
And I think that's something he's going to be able to develop. He's working out with Darren Till, who, as we know, recently made the jump up to middleweight. And so two very powerful guys. And Tyson Fury, if you saw, he's massive compared to Darren Till. And Darren Till is a gorilla. It's what he goes by. Tyson Fury's huge. I think he makes his appearance at heavyweight in the UFC. I think he maybe learns some hard lessons, and he maybe doesn't have a great debut, but he will at some point, I think, very much contend for the title belt, which is interesting because you don't often see boxers that have the same clout that Tyson Fury has in the boxing world come over and be successful in MMA, whereas, other sports might translate a little bit better. Now, Stipe Miocic, this one is super fun. I got to research Stipe a little bit and find out. Did you know that he played college baseball and he got an offer from an MLB team?
I never knew that.
He had offers to play in Major League Baseball. Like, he played for a Division II college, and he had he had above a 300 batting average, right? So very talented baseball player, very highly recruited baseball player. He was also a fireman years ago. This guy has torn through the biggest and baddest division in the UFC, and he's done it for years despite his little stint with Daniel Cormier. He still now, once again, holds the heavyweight title, and I think he will for a long time. And he's fighting guys that have done this their whole lives, and Stipe Miocic is just a physical specimen who went from one sport to another, and I think that's why he makes his top list for me. And then the last one, probably the biggest one, is Demetrius Johnson, Mighty Mouse. Another thing I didn't know about him, he was a track star in high school and college. That makes perfect sense. If we're being honest. I mean, I don't know why it's not like I doubted that, but I didn't know that, and I think I should have. Mighty Mouse came into the UFC after being in the WEC, after dominating at the higher divisions, to be a number one pound for pound fighter for how many years was it? He was like 2.5 years. He was the number one pound for pound guy every week.
I don't know if it was that long consecutively. I think John Jones's suspensions got in the way of that at times.
Right.
But yes, obviously he's been at the top. He was at the top of the food chain for years.
Mm-hmm. And as a flyweight, I think that's pretty hard to do. I feel like, Henry Cejudo, just with how shallow the lighter divisions have gotten over the years, I think it's hard to hold a number one pound for pound ranking or title when you take part in lower divisions. And Demetrius Johnson, track star, former cross country guy, has implemented the things that we do for working out that he took as a sport, track and cross country. And I mean, he implemented it into his game and was one of the most dominant UFC fighters I think we'll ever see, with 10 or 11 title defenses.
I believe he's 12.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Incredible.
Absolute stud.
All right, let's jump into round number 1, UFC Fight Night recap. Brick, what were some of the biggest moments, most memorable moments, and your takeaways from this weekend?
Well, it's pretty, easy. I don't want to be taking the easy road, but it is, it's hard to say that the main event of that fight means nothing, because it definitely does. Zabit Magomedsharipov, I think that was probably the biggest moment. It wasn't a fantastically entertaining fight. It was clinical by Zabit. He did everything he needed to do to stuff Calvin Kattar and to defeat Calvin Kattar by a unanimous decision. I thought it was a great night for him, and I think he has a lot of things coming in the future. But Alexander Volkov, actually, that is who I would give my biggest shout out to, because oh no,
no, that's
you're great. You're looking like you're gonna take me to school here in a second.
I'm not taking you to school.
All right. Well, Greg Hardy, a lot of hype, undefeated in the UFC. He had that controversial no contest just a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
And I picked Greg Hardy in this fight. I picked him last week to win on Saturday against Alexander Volkov, considering Volkov is coming off a year layoff and a nasty knockout against Derek Lewis. So big ups to Alexander Volkov. Not necessarily does he put himself in title contention talks or anything like that, but that's what you call bouncing back.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We'll talk about Zabit in the next round, and so I'm gonna spend a lot of my time and my take on the Alexander Volkov versus Greg Hardy fight, and the reason for that is, as much as I was impressed with Alexander Volkov's performance, I was also impressed. More so, I want to talk about Greg Hardy. I'm sorry. Let's just pump the brake on a lot of these guys. There's too many people that we are rushing through these things. We want Greg Hardy so bad to be a star because he was Dana White Contender Series. Before that, he was an NFL player. Yeah. He has a lot of controversy around him. Let's just pump the brake. Greg Hardy's loss with like the no contest with the inhaler and all those different things, this loss against Alexander Volkov, his last two fights have been a disappointment for him, absolutely. And so maybe all of these things at some point make him better. Maybe at some point all of these things make him realize, I have to be more sophisticated and things like that. And we're already seeing that. If we look at just a few months ago in his second and third MMA fight, pro MMA fights, he was simply a man who was hungry, looking to get a knockout any way that he could. Not nearly as much technicality, not nearly as much, trying to figure out exactly how he wanted to do it or anything like that. No reading of the other fighter. It was strictly Greg Hardy wanting to knock the other guy out. Today, we are seeing a much more clear, concise, attentive Greg Hardy that is actually becoming a true mixed martial artist. And so if I were, in charge, I would be saying, let's pump the brakes on Greg Hardy. He is going to be there. He is going to be one of the top guys in the heavyweight division. We have seen that. He has blown through all of those, those undercard names and the not so big names. But let's just keep him away from these huge names until he is ready, because he will, once he is ready, it's going to be a fun fireworks show between Greg Hardy and the rest of the heavyweight division.
I think there's a fine line between rushing a exciting up-and-comer in the UFC and not, because we've had this conversation before and it dealt with the likes of Ben Askren. I'd like to bring Conor McGregor into that conversation. I know that's not necessarily what we're talking about, but as far as rushing Greg Hardy, I really like discussing, is he being rushed? Will he be rushed? And Ben Askren arguably was. But here's my argument is, the fighter gets into the UFC with so much excitement and so much desire to just keep going and get crazy big fights and to just make money, like Greg Hardy did, like Ben Askren did. Like all these guys get into the UFC, they don't want easy fights. And I argue that Conor McGregor did start out with a few easy ones. So I think it all depends on who you start out fighting and your attitude coming in, because Conor McGregor fought a few times in his first 2-3 years in the UFC. I think I've got it right here, between April 5th, 2013 and July 10th, 2015, he fought 6 times. Granted, a couple of them big names, Dustin Poirier, Max Holloway, Chad Mendes, and then very quickly after, Jose Aldo. But I think it all depends on the attitude that you come in with. Greg Hardy does not necessarily have that swagger, that caliber that Conor McGregor does. It's hard to compare anyone to Conor McGregor and say he has as much charisma as this guy. But I think coming into the UFC with that type of attitude is very important.
No, it's absolutely interesting. Greg Hardy does have an attitude of, I want to be a star. I'm going to be a star. I'm from the NFL. I am all these things. However, does he have the skill to back it up? Conor McGregor grew up a trained mixed martial artist. Ben Askren was a 2-time world champion before he came into the UFC. Greg Hardy is just a big name at the moment, and he is going to become a great mixed martial artist. But in my opinion, if we just pump the brakes on him a little bit, we give this guy a little bit of time to breathe, maybe 2020 has 2 fights, 3 fights, be active, but not necessarily taking every fight that's possibly thrown at you, because you're going to end up with more losses than you would like to see on your record if that happens.
All right, let's get it going. Round 2. I am actually very excited about this one. We kind of flirted with it a little bit, the topic of what is next for Zabit Magomedsharipov. He had an impressive win over the weekend against Calvin Kattar, in Moscow. So very big statement. Blake, what do you think is next for this featherweight?
So Zabit is so interesting and so fun to talk about for a lot of reasons. 1 is his rise, 2 is his record, 3 is his style of fighting, the way he looks. He's also very memeable. He kind of looks like Abraham Lincoln. All of these different things make him very, very marketable. However, I don't think that his win over Calvin Kattar was impressive enough because of the round 3 cardio wear out that he had, right? When you go into these championship title fights against a Max Holloway, he's got a gas tank. You take any of these championship fighters and they are ready for 5-round fights. Zabit clearly is not ready for that right now. Since facing big names in Calvin Kattar and Jeremy Stevens, he has not looked nearly as dominant, in my opinion. And on top of that, everyone is booked. Jose and Frankie are going down to 135. You have Max Holloway fighting Alexander Volkanovski. Brian Ortega is going to be fighting the Korean Zombie in a few weeks. Between all of these different things, I would like to see Zabit face Yair Rodriguez. It is the only fair fight, in my opinion, that I see him where he actually gets something that if he wins, he gets something. If he loses, he's still in that top contender spot where he hasn't necessarily lost everything. And same for Yair Rodriguez. This is a very even fight for maybe these guys are, whoever wins this fight finally gets the chance to face Alexander Volkanovski or Max Holloway for the featherweight strap. But for right now, again, pump the brakes on Zabit. I don't think he deserves the immediate title fight after, UFC 245. Give him Yair Rodriguez, and that would be a very, very fun fight. And that'd be a very, very fun fight to see matchup-wise. Yair Rodriguez's cardio versus Zabit's ability to wrestle, his ability to pick pieces apart and things like that. Yair Rodriguez obviously coming off of that crazy Jeremy Stevens fight, and Zabit having the 2019 that he has had.
Mm-hmm. I think in the featherweight division there are only two categories. There are those who deserve to fight 5 rounds, and those who don't. It should be clear. It should be black and white. Who in the featherweight division deserves to fight for 5 rounds on a main card for a belt? Max Holloway, Alexander Volkanovski. That's it right now. No one else has really proved that. Brian Ortega got his title shot, was defeated by Max Holloway last year. And then you've got guys like Zabit, you've got guys Brian Ortega, Korean Zombie, Yair Rodriguez, Jeremy Stevens. If he gets another win, it's going to need to be an impressive one. But the featherweight division is you've got one pool of guys who are ready to go, and then you've got one pool of guys who are really trying to get there. And like you said, Yair Rodriguez, I think, is definitely in that conversation when he fights Zabit, because I think that is the next fight to make.
It seems. I mean, I went through the top 10 rankings in the featherweight division, and either everyone is booked up, moving divisions. It is Yair Rodriguez and Zabit who have any sort of chance to take on Max Holloway, and so that really is the clear cut winner.
I think it's super funny actually. It's interesting. It's very similar to the light heavyweight division right now.
Yes,
you've got a long-standing champion in John Jones. Featherweight, you've got Max Holloway. You've got an obvious contender who deserves this shot, Dominic Reyes and Alexander Volkanovski. Then you've got all these guys floating around the division, kind of tantalizingly getting close to a title shot, but not necessarily there. Very interesting, very similar. I really hope we get to see Zabit fight in the next 6 months. And I think if he's smart, if Yair is smart, they will both want to fight each other, because next to the title shots and next to Brian Ortega, they're the biggest names in the featherweight division right now.
Absolutely. All right, round number 3. This is a new thing that we're kind of doing. Brick really wanted to do it, and I'm excited to do it as well. MMA gossip. There's been a lot of storylines, nothing confirmed by Dana White, but a lot of things being talked about in the works. Tyson Fury, Jorge Masvidal going to boxing versus Canelo Alvarez. Brick, what is going on in the MMA gossip world, and what are your biggest takeaways?
Well, there's a few things that I kind of want to throw your way and ask you about and kind of get your take on them, because I feel like I'm alone in my own thoughts. Remember when you told me about how you were watching Gregor Gillespie a few years ago, and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm alone in my thoughts. Who is this guy? That's kind of how I feel. There's so much happening in the UFC as far as tabloids, as far as trash talk, gossip. And I would just like to, I don't know, quote myself. This isn't an I told you so moment, but I'd like to quote myself. I think it was the second show that we did when we were at the university library recording our show. And I said, I think that there's going to be an Amanda Nunes, Chris Cyborg three-peat. And it was in the news. Chris Cyborg wants that fight. Chris Cyborg wants a Bellator UFC cross-platform fight between Amanda Nunes. I just want to know, I know this isn't part of the round. Are you here for it? Do you think it's going to happen?
I'm not here for it, and here's why, because it won't happen. I'm here for it in every single way, in terms of weight class, in terms of them fighting once again. I'm totally down for all of those things. I do not want to see that happen in terms of if this were to happen, It would be pulling teeth with Dana White. It would be pulling teeth with Scott Coker. It would take forever to actually happen. But I would love to see a UFC Bellator crossover event. Will it happen? I don't think so, and that's why I would not be here for it.
Okay, interesting. Other stuff happening in the news in the world of MMA. We talked a little bit about Tyson Fury coming over. We talked a little bit about him. We talked about Masvidal possibly going over and fighting Canelo. We've talked about like cross-platforming Bellator UFC, UFC boxing, UFC with other promotions. I don't know. What do you think about all this that's happening with Canelo, Masvidal, Fury, Stipe? I don't know if you saw Tyson Fury says he wants a fight with Stipe Miocic.
Yes.
He wants that fight.
So here's the thing that's interesting is Dana White is in the UFC. His son boxes. He loves boxing. Dana White is a boxing guy. If there's going to be any sort of crossover, it's going to be between boxing and the UFC. And if you ask me, I think that Masvidal Canelo is even more likely than Nunes versus Cyborg and things like that. On top of that, I think Tyson Fury versus Stipe Miocic. If Stipe Miocic can get a couple more wins under his belt in 2020, I would not be surprised if Tyson Fury comes up and fights Stipe Miocic for some crazy crossover super event where it would be, MMA, it would be under UFC, but they would be inviting somebody in as celebrated as a Tyson Fury to fight someone as celebrated as Stipe Miocic. So that would be fun. But like I said, Dana White is in the business of boxing. Dana White wants to work with boxing, and he doesn't want to be working with other competitors and build their name by using the UFC's name. And so that's why I would say that that Dana White is more on the side of boxing, that we are going to be seeing probably more of a boxing UFC crossover.
Let me tell you what I think.
Yes.
I think Tyson Fury fights Stipe Miocic in 2020.
Okay.
I think that happens, possibly in the summer. And here's why. Do you remember how crazy... No one, if you were a sports fan, if you were an MMA fan, it didn't matter. If you owned a television and you had friends, you were talking about Conor McGregor calling out Floyd Mayweather. Do you remember how crazy that was when that fight wasn't fixed yet, but like there was some trash talk and Conor was saying he wants it and everyone was saying that's not going to happen, it's not going to happen, and it happened?
Yeah.
That's going to happen, and here's why. The MMA world, the UFC, scratched the back of Floyd Mayweather and Money Promotions and the boxing world by letting the untainted godson of the UFC, Conor McGregor, go over and face the undefeated, undisputed, greatest boxing legend to step foot on the canvas in Floyd Mayweather. It's time for boxing to scratch the UFC's back, right? Boxing owes the UFC world one of their legends, and the one who's living and breathing right now, it's either Canelo or it's Tyson Fury. And Tyson Fury is already saying, I want to fight Stipe Miocic. I want to do this. And it's not like Stipe Miocic is going to say no, because Stipe's in this realm of the UFC, which, let's be honest, is way more cocky, way more rambunctious.
Way more fun.
Sure. Yeah, way more fun. And like, it's usually the MMA guys calling out other sports and saying, I want to do this, I want to do this. Tyson Fury is doing Stipe a favor. If Stipe takes this fight, win or lose, the cash out is going to be nuts for either of these guys. And Stipe will solidify himself as one of the greatest heavyweights of all time if he's able to do this, and vice versa for Tyson Fury. So I think this fight happens for multiple reasons, all of which I just stated. 2020 is going to be nuts.
Does he step in front of a Francis Ngannou? Because let's say, okay, so Stipe and Daniel Cormier will fight in January, February. I mean, I don't want it to happen, but it's already in the works. They've already pretty much said once Stipe is healed, that's going to be the fight, which I don't want to happen, of course. Number two, is Francis Ngannou really going to be overlooked for a Tyson Fury? And unfortunately, I wouldn't be surprised if they do, but I just wouldn't like to see that happen. Just me being the MMA purist that I am.
Right.
But I love everything that you're saying.
And speaking of Francis Ngannou, there was a video that went viral of him taking a little 30-second boxing class from Mike Tyson.
Yeah.
There is a lot happening between boxing and MMA nowadays, and I think the cards are going to shuffle. The cards' names are Daniel Cormier, Francis Ngannou, Tyson Fury, Stipe Miocic, possibly Derek Lewis, possibly Rosenstrike. You never know.
It's getting fun.
It's going to be a crazy 2020 in the heavyweight division.
And really quick, I know we're way over time for this round, but Jorge Masvidal, Canelo Alvarez, how likely do you think that happens in your opinion?
Not so much.
I don't think so either.
Although Jorge Masvidal has all these people calling him out, and he has opportunities with Nick Diaz and Canelo and a possible rematch with Nate, possible Conor McGregor fight. It's not that he has bigger fish to fry, but I think the world might be attaching themselves too much to Jorge Masvidal, and I think there's going to be a point where Jorge steps down and goes, "Guys, chill out. Like, I just want to do me." And I think he sees a title shot in the next year.
He absolutely does see a title shot. I think he sees a title shot as soon as UFC 245 is over. And so all of these questions come, and I agree with you. I don't think that Jorge Masvidal goes over to boxing. I also don't think that Canelo Alvarez is big enough a marketing tool like a Floyd Mayweather, like a Conor McGregor, to fill the shoes of what has happened in the past. It would not make nearly as much money. It would not be nearly as big of an event. And so pump the brakes. And like you said, which I absolutely loved, the boxing world is time to scratch. It's time to scratch the back of the UFC and do the UFC a favor.
Love it. All right, let's get it going with round 4. This round has to do with the fights that happened this weekend, UFC Fight Night on ESPN Plus, and it is Jan Blachowicz versus Jacare Souza. Really quick, Blake. Give me some picks or give me some insight.
Yeah, no, I think that Jacare is going to win this one. I really don't see a lot of people actually think Blachowicz is going to win this fight. He's got a win over Luke Rockhold. He's got some big wins. However, the only losses that Jacare Souza has are against Jack Hermanson, a grappling star, Kelvin Gastelum, Robert Whitaker, Yoel Romero. I mean, Jacare Souza has faced the best of the best, beaten some greats, and only lost to the absolute. I mean, you got interim titles, you got title guys who have faced off for the title, huge names, and you have Jack Hermanson, who is absolutely one of those rising stars as well. And so for all those different things, I don't think that Jacare Souza has any problem this weekend.
I think it'll be a very interesting fight. I think Jacare Souza is a physical specimen, and he will be very inviting to stand up and to box with Jan Blachowicz. Jan, at this point, could be facing the curse of the John Jones call-out. If you remember a few months ago, Jan Blachowicz said, "I want John Jones to taste the taste of Finland," or something like that, or wherever he's from.
Whatever he said.
Right. It was a little bit of a shot at John Jones's name. And as we've seen in the past year, fighters to do that prematurely go up against light heavyweight or middleweight contenders, and they get knocked out. We've seen it with Rockhold. We've seen it most recently with Chris Weidman. Exactly.
Johnny Walker.
Exactly. So I think it'll be an interesting weekend. I'm excited to see it, but who knows?
Alrighty, let's jump into round number 5. Are you here for it? Nick Diaz versus Jorge Masvidal. As we know, Nick Diaz was on Ariel Helwani's show last Wednesday. It was pre-recorded. They posted it yesterday on Ariel Helwani's live MMA show. And Nick Diaz was talking about, Jorge Masvidal. I took offense to him saying that he wanted to baptize Nate. That's my little brother. You don't say that about somebody's little brother. And so now it's kind of personal. And now, things are coming up. Do we want Nick Diaz to fight Jorge Masvidal? Would Jorge Masvidal be down for that? Jorge Masvidal actually posted a video. It was an animated video of him wearing the suit from a movie, and he was saying, and it said F the Diaz brothers and things like that. So clearly there's talks coming on. The question is, Brick, are you here for it?
I think I am, because I love fights and I love drama in the UFC. It's a plausible fight. Both of these guys are journeymen. I mean, if you told me a year ago that we were going to see Jorge Masvidal have the greatest year of anyone in the UFC with 3 insane fights, with 3 insane TKO finishes, then I'd be blown away. And so to say him and Nate Diaz are going to fight for a BMF title, The Rock is going to be there, I would have been blown away. And now to tell me that Jorge Masvidal is now going to fight Nate Diaz's older brother, Nick Diaz, it's less surprising. It's less shocking to me to think that this can't happen, this won't happen. Jorge Masvidal does have big things happening in his future, but he is a journeyman, and he just won the BMF title. He's not the type of guy to go after a title shot because he wants to. He's a guy to go after the money, and he's a guy to go after the attention. And fighting both Diaz brothers in the span of a few months, that'll do it.
He is a bigger guy. He is a guy to go after money fights. He's also a guy to go after respect. And so I think that the middle ground of that is obviously the story between Colby Covington and American Top Team versus Jorge Masvidal and his time with him and his training with American Top Team. These two guys used to to be friends. They used to, do all these things together, and now they really hate each other, and now they want to fight each other. That's more of a story, in my opinion, than Nick Diaz saying in a pretty difficult interview to watch that he wanted to fight Nate, or that he wanted to fight Jorge Masvidal because he said that he wanted to baptize Nate. I just don't really see a whole lot of substance in this. I think that this is kind of another one of those things where I've talked about it with DC and Stipe. It's kind of becoming a made-up rivalry where it was built up. The BMF, I talked about it last week. It was almost more of a marketing fluke rather than it was anything more of a respected, title belt or anything like that. You had The Rock, you had It Won't Be Defended, and all these different things. It was two guys who don't necessarily, it wasn't for a title or anything like that.
They invented a division.
Exactly. They invented a division for these two fighters to market. A lot of that reason is because Colby Covington and Kamaru Usman were not going to fight in November. Instead, they moved it to December. Jorge Masvidal just has bigger fish to fry. A Conor McGregor versus Jorge Masvidal fight would be bigger. Even Jorge Masvidal and Canelo Alvarez, I think that would be bigger. And the reason why I say that is because Nick Diaz, we haven't seen him in almost 5 years. I mean, it was January 31st, I believe, of 2015 is the last time that we saw Nick Diaz in the UFC octagon. He also said earlier on in that interview that he did not want to come back. So how serious is Nick Diaz when he says this? I don't think so. I don't think he really understands the magnitude of what he said, and I don't think he actually wants it as bad as everybody is making it up to be.
Really quick, two things. Nick Diaz is, he's just trying to get famous again. He knows his little brother is the cool guy in high school that you talked about in your final thought. Here's my question. Where was Nick Diaz when Conor McGregor was doing all this stuff to Nate? I'm sure he had stuff to say, but now that Nick has a platform, Ariel Helwani show exists, and he has this, cool, cushy interview with this ESPN guy. Now he has a voice to say, "Oh, you don't say that about my little brother." Where was this when Conor McGregor was unbelievably disrespectful? It's not like Jorge Masvidal said something awful to Nate Diaz. There was actually a lot of respect.
It was all love. It was all love.
Exactly. And that's just kind of Masvidal's thing to say, I baptize people. I'm the street Jesus, blah, blah, blah. But here's my other point that I actually go along with yours. If in 6 months, Jorge Masvidal was given the opportunity to fight Colby Covington, not for a title. Let's say Covington loses in December.
Okay.
Masvidal is offered a fight with Canelo Alvarez. He's offered a fight with Nick Diaz, and he's offered a fight with Colby Covington. The only thing that will answer this question is who's been talking the most crap recently about Jorge.
Colby.
Right. Well, I mean, we'll see in the next 6 months. We'll see what develops. But, I mean, Jorge Masvidal turned down, he didn't necessarily turn it down, but he welcomed a fine of probably a couple thousands of dollars by punching Leon Edwards in the face in the background of an interview. Jorge Masvidal goes after the guys he doesn't like. While he does love money fights, if he was offered a fight with Colby Covington and their stint is still very much alive from a few months from now, I think he takes that fight over any title shot.
I agree. I think Jorge Masvidal is somebody who is, what is he? He's a BMF, right? He's a BMF, and this Nick Diaz thing seems fake to me.
Yeah.
This Nick Diaz thing seems like we're going to be not talking about it in a few weeks. And even, like you said, a Leon Edwards, in my opinion, is even more of a story. Why? Because we have footage. We have something that actually happened. We have beef there. Nick Diaz calling out some dude in a ESPN pre-recorded interview with Ariel Helwani is not nearly, and the reason it is picking up traction is the name and what just happened at UFC 244.
That's it. That's all it is. Because, the clout behind this interview is so much greater than Jorge Masvidal going after Leon Edwards, but that's just because it was on national TV and it was with Ariel Helwani with nice equipment and everything. Masvidal doesn't need that.
No, he doesn't. He's a BMF.
Boxing and MMA. It's been a very common subject on our show today, talking about Tyson Fury, Canelo Alvarez, and their subsequent possible fights in the future with MMA stars. Now, my question is boxing or MMA winning? And I'd like to dig a little bit into that. Is it winning? Well, if you ask yourself, are there bigger stars in boxing or in MMA? Well, it depends on who you ask. However, I would like to reference Brendan Schaub when he on his podcast talked a little bit about this. And if you didn't hear that, hear this. If you didn't know, that big night of boxing, that was the same night as the BMF title. I don't even know what boxing match it was because it was the BMF title, and this will prove the point. The main card of that boxing match was put on hold, and the BMF title was put up on a jumbotron and a jumbo screen in the stadium where the boxing match was being held, and the fans watched this UFC event. Wasn't even a title event. Let's be honest, 244 was not for a real title, and yet the boxing world stood at a standstill, waited for the UFC to be done. It was like no, you go ahead. No, sorry, you go ahead. You take our spotlight. You do what you need to do, and then we'll get our stuff out of the way when you're done. The question of is boxing or MMA winning is an ongoing discussion. I think we see a lot of change happening in the next year or two with Tyson Fury, possibly Canelo Alvarez, possibly with a Floyd Mayweather comeback. Who knows? A lot is happening. A lot is always happening in the fight world. But the big thing to realize is that MMA holds a different stature than boxing does. And what I mean by that is journeymen are very different in either sport. You don't have journeyman titles in boxing. You don't have MMA events put on hold because two boxers with double-digit losses are fighting. That doesn't happen. Whereas in the UFC, if you have a BMF in Nate Diaz with double-digit losses, a BMF in Jorge Masvidal, whatever it may be, these guys had 20-plus losses combined, and they put on hold a boxing match of two guys who are probably really close to undefeated. That's kind of how boxing works. When you are undefeated, you're close to 40-0, you're 30-0, you're 25-0, and you get giant fights. That undefeated bout, that huge boxing match was put on hold to watch two guys fight who have been in the league for years and have double-digit losses. I think the UFC runs away with this question, although there's a lot that's going to be changing, a lot that's going to be happening. Advantage UFC, they get their hand raised here for me at the end of the day.
Is that recording? Okay. A pioneer, an absolute animal, an absolute thug. Maybe not all the time, though, because sometimes you fall out of love, and when that happens, your performance deteriorates. When what you love becomes a drag, it is harder to do what you love. Ben Askren's UFC career has not been what it was believed to be, because he no longer loved it. Rory McDonald currently struggles with fighting because of the way it used to be versus what the reality is now. Maybe he doesn't love it as much as he used to. But Thug Rose Namajunas, fell out of love with fighting. But she did it right. When it became a drag, she went away. And yesterday, she explained that when she found her love for it again, she found herself as well. Another example is Darren Till, a guy who is not to be looked at as just a fighter, but also a human with regular emotions, just like the rest of us. Now that Rose has found it, and she has found herself along the way, now that it's no longer a drag or a chore, she has found herself. And fighting was a part of that. Now that she has found herself, I believe a belt will be a part of that as well, because she did it the right way.
And what do you know? Blake O'Rulean puts tears on our eyes again.
Oh, thanks.
What a final thought. What a final take. Man, what an episode. I mean, it was a lot of fun talking about things that are going on in the UFC. It's kind of interesting to me. What I love to do is talk about the fighting world when there's not a lot of fighting happening. You know what I'm saying? Like, we've got a couple of UFC fight nights between, good fights, Calvin Kattar, Zabit, and then we have Jacare Souza this weekend. Like, we've got good fights, but as far as the hangover, the BMF title, and UFC 245 on its way, it's a lot of fun to talk about UFC gossip, talk about boxing.
A lot of talk, not as much fighting, but there's a lot of talk.
Right, exactly. Thank you so much for tuning in to FTN from the Nosebleeds, episode 13. We are excited to supply you this episode. It'll be up on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and SoundCloud, and pretty much any other way that you like to listen to our voices. Blake, you got anything to send us off?
Got nothing. Nothing to send you off with, Brick.
All right. Well, then, don't be Richard. Send us off.